Thanks, John. It's really nice to meet you, and it's really nice to see Francesca again. I was going to ask her where she is, but John already said she's in Puglia, so we can all be a little bit jealous. I just wanted to say I met Francesca originally in Rome to interview her for her first collection, The Other Language. And I saw her this winter to talk about the new collection, this one, Animal Spirit. They're both marvelous, but very different. These stories feel more measured and mature. They're exotic, they're erotic. They speak to the animal world and also the animal spirit in all of us. So, Francesca, here we go. Can you tell us the inspiration for these stories, how you came to write them?
How did I come to write them? I don't know. I only realized that I was writing a series of stories about animals after a while. I mean, I was just thinking about things that, I don't know. I'm sorry. I just can't answer this question because I don't know. They all came one after the other without a real plan. And only at the end, I realized that so many stories had animals in them. But as you said, more than pets, really, they're predators or wild creatures. And I think that that's how suddenly I realized that they had a connection. They were connected to one another. But in the very beginning, I started writing the story of that had the one that takes place in Rome that has seagulls and a hawk, because a friend of mine told me once that in order to get rid of these seagulls that, as you know, are invading Rome and keeping people awake at night, have colonized the city, they get pretty ferocious, and they colonize the terraces, and they become, pests and quite dangerous. And when she told me that in order to get rid of them, she had to call a falconer who came with a hawk, I thought, that is such a great idea, this sort of wilderness that comes to a city. And thinking about, how we live in these urban environments and we forget that there is a wildlife everywhere that is unseen, but it's really around us. Like, I was also thinking lately that after, of course, I'd written the collection, that during COVID, we were all witnessing this return of nature in our urban settings. And in a way, that animal spirit that I've been writing about sort of came through the cracks while we were, sitting between our four walls, and outside, nature was taking over again. We had in Rome so many birds hovering and taking over the city. There were foxes, there were, just swans in the lake, just creatures kept appearing at such a fast rate. And I thought, they've been with us all along. And somehow, we just never see them. And anyway, I've been,
Well, Francesca sent me a very funny picture of a bird nesting in a car door. The door was open and it was in there where you usually put your coffee cup, but it was a pigeon nest or something. But you were talking about the vicious seagulls, and there's a quote, a piece that I wanted to read about it because there's just lines that touch me. And this is in this story, a woman moves to Rome and she's on her balcony and she's having issues in her marriage and she wants to be on her own, and she rents this beautiful apartment and she goes out to have coffee on her terrace. And this is just a line. Diana opened her eyes just in time to see a white streak, giant wings flapping low over her head. She ducked to avoid the strike of the bird's razor-sharp claws. Diana and the bird were face to face. She met its glaucous, red-circled eyes, filled with rage. So I think that really captures the violence that Francesca has in here with some of her animals. But Francesca, you've written 3 novels. So what drew you to the short story? This is your second collection.
I don't know. I thought suddenly one short story, and immediately another idea came up, and then another one, and that's how the other language came to life. And as I was writing one story after the other, I thought, wow, this is such an incredible form. It's such an incredible, um, you know, I just love the form of the short story. Why didn't I ever write a short story before? And then, as you know, short stories are not what people love to read the most. People tend to read novels. I decided I still had more and I wanted to repeat. So I wrote another batch, which maybe, I don't know, I thought I now need to write a novel. But actually, to be honest with you, when I keep thinking about ideas now, they all come in that same form, which is more contracted. Well, my stories are pretty long compared to short stories. They're about 35 pages, sometimes 40 pages. So they're quite long. They're like little novellas. But and they cover usually quite a bit of time. But I mean, I keep thinking of what I want to write, and I realize that all my ideas are now coming in form of a short story. So I don't know, maybe I found my ideal genre, and we'll see. I definitely, there's something very attractive about a short story because it's all about details. It's about finding the one little tiny thing that flips the story over and that makes it work suddenly. And it's always a small epiphany, but that epiphany has to be very clear before you start writing the story. And it's always, sometimes in small things, there are bigger truths. And that's, I think, what fascinates me about writing short stories.
The other thing is short stories stay with you. They stay with me. Like I really remember them if they resonate. But the whole theory that, short stories are harder to sell, blah, blah, blah. I spoke to Francesca's agent, Nicola Raggi, and I said, oh, well, how do you feel about, short stories are hard to sell? She said, oh, please. She said, one year, that's all I represented was short stories. She said, I am the queen
Really?
of short stories.
But
So,
I've always loved them. I've always read short stories, I mean, to me, it's a joy because also I like to jump from one world to the other. So for me, of course, but I think people get it, they want to fall in one big setting and stay with it for a long time. But that's probably why, but I don't know, it's a mystery to me. But anyway,
maybe
one has to follow her. Yeah.
Well, you've lived all over the world, and the stories are set in Rome, but they're also set everywhere. You have stories set in this collection. There's stories set in the Southwest. There's stories set in Greece. But I wanted to ask you about Rome, because although you've lived all over the world, I feel like you're really a Roman. And I wanted to read two little things from the book, two stories that are set in Rome. And there's descriptions, and they're different. So I wanted you to maybe address how you feel about Rome. There's a story, again, that the woman who moves to Rome and has to deal with the seagulls, she says, oh my goodness, I lost it.
She's an American. She's coming from Brooklyn, actually.
She's American coming from Brooklyn, right? And did I lose
to
it?
write.
Oh my God. Okay, let me go to the other part. The last book is set in Rome, and it's an American coming back after many years. And you say, the city had radically changed, as if throughout the years, whoever had been in charge had stopped caring, like an heiress aristocrat who no longer has the money or inclination to maintain his family palazzo and is waiting only for the roof to collapse once and for all. But in the story of the American woman, you talk about how she falls completely in love with this palazzo, with the ceilings, with the balcony. So how do you feel about the city? How do you reconcile these different ideas about it, or these different feelings about it?
Well, thanks for asking that. I was aware that I'd given completely to the opposite description of the same place. But, Rome is a city that you constantly love and hate and love. I always say Romans love to hate it, but you never tell a Roman that you hate Rome. You can't do that. We're only, but it's the same thing with New York a little bit, isn't it? But anyway, yes, Rome's changed, of course, but it keeps changing for the worse. Always, we always say, oh my God, Rome's so dirty, Rome's never the same. A friend of mine, an American friend coming back to Rome after quite a long time said, I don't know, it's changed. It's like frayed at the edges, which I thought was a perfect description because, it's a city that, and another friend said, I love this city. I said, but it's all falling to pieces. It's so badly maintained. And she said, I know, but what I love about it is the patina of time. It's not sterilized. So I think that there are two ways to look at it. It's dirty, it's badly maintained, there's holes everywhere, there's cracks in the asphalt, but in the cracks, there are beautiful flowers that emerge. So, it's a city that it's always telling you, it's made of layers, and these layers of time, and it will never look fresh because Rome is not fresh. It's sitting on top of ruins and layers of time that go down, so you have so much of it that it's actually still hidden and undisclosed. We're sitting on history, everywhere we walk, we're walking over someone's villa or an ancient market, and you kind of feel it, although you can't see it, So it's a very strange city in the new and the old, and I think that or Paris or New York. And also another problem with Rome is you can't really dig anything because the Ministry of Fine Arts will stop you, because everything that you dig will discover something ancient that needs to be preserved. So it's a city where we have no subway system, somehow kidnapped by its own history. And I think it's a curse, and in a way, like Venice, which is the epitome of it. It's a curse, and in a way, it's a blessing. So you can see it both ways. That's how I feel about it. And of course, I hate it for many reasons, but I could never leave it forever. Although I've lived for many years away from Rome, and the minute you're away from Rome, you immediately get nostalgic. So it's that love-hate that is the pull that you never get rid of.
Well, I just found the piece that I was looking at when the woman who rents the apartment, and she says she wanted to scream with joy, which is a slanting ceiling, thick ancient beams, tons of light. As soon as Diana stepped through the grand entrance of the ancient palazzo, she smelled a mix of marble and moss. So I think, you've captured the feeling of the city, both the positive.
But also that is the point of view, sorry to interrupt you, that is also the point of view of a foreigner that comes to Rome. And they can usually, as a foreigner, you see the romance and the romantic side of it. So in a way, I think what I was trying to do in that short story is to enhance her expectations and how she's delighted because the Airbnb apartment that she found fits the dream that the expectation and the dream that she has,
But then
as
she's
a tourist.
by the birds.
Sorry?
Then she's attacked by the birds when she goes to have her coffee on the balcony.
Yeah, but then the rage that she has about what's happened with her husband, she can finally release it by having a hawk kill the birds. Well, the title of the short story is also There Might Be Blood, which,
Right.
it's a sort of,
There is.
it's a bit, yeah.
The other thing, Francesca, is all your protagonists are women. They're different ages, they're in different situations, but they always persevere, and they sort of always succeed, whether in discovering themselves or, okay, tell me about your women.
Yeah.
Do you always
I don't know. I think,
start with a woman?
sorry?
Do you always consciously start with a woman character?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really. It's funny because, I write movies as well. I write scripts, and I don't have a problem writing male characters in films. But because when you write fiction, you really have to be inside a character. I cannot think of a story if not by the point of view of a woman. I find it, I mean, it becomes natural for me to think of, protagonist as a woman. So, and I think I probably wouldn't be able to, although of course there are men in every novel more.
And you capture their feelings as well.
Yeah. But I mean, I like the idea to explore that, women in different situations, as you said, but that are in some kind of, yes, always, I guess, in a journey of discovery for whatever reason. Because they're in love with somebody new, because they've been abandoned by someone, because they are wanting to do something for themselves, like writing a book, or or just discovering a new place. So a lot of the protagonists are on a search, like the protagonist of the short story called The Girl, who is a very young woman who's probably, it takes place in the 80s, and she's a sort of a little bit of a hippie, a bit of a lost child. And, so even she is trying to really figure out, who she is right after coming back from a rehab center, and trying to reinvent her life. And so very different character from all the others who are much more established,
She's a very interesting character, because she's almost, I don't want to say amoral, but she's very, she's almost cold. This man.
She's cold and tough.
Yeah,
she's very tough.
Picks her up, and he's an older man, and she's kind of a hippie, and you think, oh my goodness, this is not going to end well. But she's actually in control. And I don't want to give the story away, but he has a circus act with snakes, and he brings her in to perform with the snakes, and he introduces her to this amazing Burmese python called Snow, because it's white. And I just want to read this one thing. Snow was indeed like a fantasy, a creature from a fairy tale, a beautiful monster fabricated in a dream. And yet there she was, so real and alive, moving under the touch of Ada's fingertips. Ada kind of falls in love with this snake.
Yeah, it's a sort of almost erotic relationship, very intimate with all the snakes, but in particular with Snow. And also, the girl, when she was in rehab, she was tending horses. It was part of the therapy. And the therapy works because she loves these animals, and, she starts seeing them as real people. And so she's already, you can see that she's quite disconnected from the family. She's tough, she's cold, but she has a connection with animals. And when she sees the snakes for the first time, instead of being scared, she's completely fascinated. And she's fearless, she's completely fearless. So the snakes twirl around her body. So it's kind of almost erotic, because how she feels these very strong, bodies, all twitching muscles. It's very
It's very
sensual.
erotic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And in a way,
what do you know about snakes? How'd you come up with a Burmese white python?
I don't
Let
know.
it
I don't
go, I
know.
might add.
I touched snakes. I held them in, they were not poisonous, of course,
Right.
but I thought, what incredible creatures, they have, you touch a snake and it's like something so alive and so strong and so powerful. And like, it's the same thing when I saw a hawk. I thought, my God, this creature is so wild. They just exude something so strong. It's the same when you see animals in the wild. I also lived in Africa for many years, so I've seen elephants and lions and leopards in the wild, and you kind of get a jolt when you see them. And I think that this is what I unconsciously, by writing the stories, I realized that this was what I wanted to write about, is this connection and this transfer of power, between us and the natural world. It's a transfer of power. And so the girl, by holding the snake and perceiving that, that force and that strength and that power, she gets some of it back, and so it's almost like a shamanic kind of connection between the characters in the stories and the animals, like the woman who comes to Rome with the seagulls and the hawk. What she loves about the hawk is that the hawk is a predator and that the hawk can kill, which is something she cannot do. She needs to kill her relationship with the relationship with her husband, which has gone so wrong. And she doesn't have the courage to pull the plug. So in a way, this bird, who's a predator and knows how to kill, is like the inspiration for her to explore her own rage.
So do you think this animalistic rage is in us? Were you looking at that? Like her rage is like the falcon, or the
yeah.
Ada's feeling about the snake? That the power of the snake is also her power, she relates to it?
I think so. Something like that animals sort of can pass to us if we watch them, if we look at them in that way, and they're all around us, they're in the sky, they're behind the trees, in the woods, but we have very little time now to pay attention, to the little wildlife, that surrounds us. And so even, there is even a dog in one. I mean, most of the animals are sort of wild animals. There are elks, but there's one short story that has a dog, which is actually the short story that is called Animal Spirit. Right. And even that dog, which is a stray dog, so, is it more like an apparition, and it's more like a sort of almost like a little mystical creature in that story. So even the dog, which is a really a pet, the function of that dog in that particular story is not about something domestic. It's more like a symbol for something else, which has to do with the it's a story about two couples. One is a gay couple, the other one is a straight couple, and the four of them go on a vacation in Greece, and they have issues, different type of issues, both couples. One couple is too new and one couple is too old. And so for opposite reasons, their relationship is at a point where it's probably a bit fragile. And then they meet this little dog. It's a tiny dog that they find on a road at night, and this dog just sparks something in these couples. The urge of maybe becoming a parent and looking after a creature, you know. And so the dog is just like a vehicle for something that happens to these two couples, if you see what I mean.
Yes. Well, the other thing you do so well is you capture emotions, because everybody's very emotional. You know, all these things are happening, these relationships, they're falling apart, they're being created, you know, they're being interrupted. The one set in the Southwest, a woman goes back to see an ex-lover who's losing his mind, you know, and she's following him through the desert. But the first story, which is Terrible Things Could Happen to Us, is about an affair. And it opens up, it's very funny where it's not funny. Francesca and I thought it was funny, where the woman's husband dies. And of course, she kind of was wishing this because she's in love with this other man. But there's a description of the affair that I thought was really, I'm going to read this. After the first few euphoric rendezvous, their lovemaking became more intense, verging on the dramatic, as though they needed to invest it with the desperation of their imminent separation, rather than the solace of being reunited. Such is the fate of adulterers. Sandro would think when he held her tiny frame in his arms. Clandestine love was insatiable, like an eating disorder. There was no joy in it, only desire, no fulfillment, only longing. I mean, that is so exquisite and perfect. You don't have
Such
to.
a frustration. Being so in love with somebody, lost, and not having enough of it ever. So that it's, yeah. Well, that's the situation they're in.
Right.
And yeah, that is the first story. Doesn't really have animals in it, but
Aren't
the
there
little
starlings?
girl.
Are there starlings flying around? Aren't there starlings flying around?
No,
No.
there's a cat in the house, but that's no. But it's more about this woman who falls in love or in lust, we don't know, with this man. They have an affair, and basically the two little girls are kind of a little bit left. I mean, they're pretty much left behind. And in my imaginations, the little girls are feral girls. You know, they're not pretty. They're kind of a little feral, and they look like two kittens, you know, that are wild. You know, there's something wild about these two girls who are sulking, and they're not, and they're mad. You know, they're mad at her mother, at their mother, for sort of not, for forgetting them because she's so into this affair. So there's something that I saw about the girls, which I thought, I mean, I kept seeing them as two sort of little tiny, you know, wild creatures. There's something, yes, it's about also the fact that a clandestine affair can really work when it's equal. You know, two people, both lying, both betraying someone else,
Right.
both running a risk. Then she loses her husband in, you know, in an
So now she's
accident.
available.
Yeah, and suddenly the relationship tilts. And it's, you know, now she's free. She doesn't have to lie. She doesn't have to cheat. She doesn't have to betray anybody. And she can have the lover come to the house and meet the girls. And, you know, and so now the situation is no longer the same. And
Right.
that has consequences. So, yes.
Okay. This is off the track a little bit, but you have to tell me about the wild parakeets in Rome that live in the trees.
Well, Rome again has been invaded by seagulls now for 10 years, and we cannot get rid of them. And suddenly there were these, we woke up and we had also the tropical parakeets. And you know, and they obviously, we don't know where they came from. Probably just some people left them off, you know, just freed them from cages or something. But apparently, and this is what I read, they found the perfect climate in Rome, and they reproduce very quickly in Parco Doria Pamphili, which is this huge park. And so now they're getting so much bigger than the parakeets that were originally sold to the shops. And there become so many. And now we just have these new sounds. You know, we have crows, which we never had. We have seagulls, which we never had. And we have parakeets. So the soundtrack in Rome is also changed completely. And this is something also that I was thinking about, how, you know, we get used to our soundtrack, which is the natural soundtrack. Like if you go to India, the first sound you hear is these crows that never stop, you know, and that is, to me, that is India. But it's determined by the birds, you know, the sound.
I'm sorry, you wrote part of this book in India, didn't you?
Yes, I was on a residence. I actually, every time I've written a book, I've been away on a residence. And I've been twice, actually 3 times in India on different residences. And which were, once, the first 2 times I was in a residence that was offered by a classical dance company that hosted also a small number of writers within their community outside Bangalore. And that was an incredible experience, because we were a bunch of maybe 8 or 7, 8 or 9 writers. And we shared our meals with this classical dance company. So they were rehearsing their beautiful, beautiful choreography. And we were writing in our rooms. And then we would meet for meals and exchange. We could watch them dance during the rehearsals and just live with them. And it was incredible.
You've set
so
stories.
I'm very grateful. Sorry?
You've set stories in India, not in this collection, but in the other collection, correct?
No, in fact, I've been with them twice, and I got to know them pretty well. I thought these women were goddesses. I mean, they were so beautiful, so graceful. They're amazing. So finally, I wrote a story about in the last collection of short stories. And I wrote a story about a couple that goes to India on holiday, and the husband falls completely in love with this dancer. Because I thought, if I was a man, I would be absolutely in love immediately with, these women are supernatural beauties and smart and amazing to watch when they dance.
So, Francesca, before we do the questions, would you like to read something? Do you have a favorite passage you'd like to read from the book?
Well, I was thinking of reading the sort of prequel to what happens in the first story, Terrible Things Could Happen to Us, how the 2 protagonists fall in love and why.
I just
it's just a couple of pages. So Sandra was in love. For more than a year, he had been taking the same early morning yoga class in a small studio in Monte, not far from the Colosseum. He and other 3 guys were the only men among a large group of women who ranged from their 20s to 74. He envied how all their bodies easily flexed and realized how much more rigid the men seemed to be. One day, Emilia appeared as a substitute for Maura, their usual teacher. Maura had had an accident on her bike, and Emilia was to take over the class for 2 months. Her tiny body was strong, yet curvy and perfectly proportioned, but her bob of dark hair gained her a sort of boyish allure. The guys exchanged a glance among themselves, as though they didn't trust that she would have enough experience. But right away, she proved to be a much more adroit instructor. Soon the whole class was panting and huffing in the attempt to replicate the sequences she demonstrated, curling and uncurling, twisting her torso right and left with geometric precision in seemingly effortless fluid movements. She encouraged the students to try more challenging poses. You can do it as long as you keep breathing. But at the same time, she warned them not to push themselves over the limit. Don't let your ego take over. So that within a couple of weeks, everyone felt in their stretches the unexpected progress they'd made. Emilia would walk around the class as the students were holding their asanas and lightly touch their bodies, adjusting them into the right position. She would whisper in the students' ears words that made them proud of themselves. Open your heart. Yeah, like this. Ah, that's it. Here you go. That's beautiful. Sandro sensed that her touch on him wasn't completely neutral. At first, he thought he must be imagining this, that it must be a classic projection, a kind of yogic transference. It was hard to decipher, but he was convinced that something akin to an erotic current flowed from her fingertips to his core. He tried to send back the same message, concentrating on the parts of his body that she touched and charging them with an equivalent amount of electricity. He also increased his attendance in class from twice a week to 3. After class, before getting into the shower, they would all linger around the herbal tea corner where Emilia would sit with her legs crossed on the wooden bench. But Sandro didn't take part in the tea break ritual. He wanted to have a moment with Emilia without the others watching. One day, feeling bold, he waited for her outside the yoga studio. She was intent on unlocking her bicycle when he approached her. Emilia, I have a question for you. She turned. Her short hair was damp from the shower, and when she turned, he saw she'd put on dark red lipstick. She looked sexy, like a strong and petite French movie star from the 60s. Oh, hi, I almost didn't recognize you with clothes on. She pointed at the fresco di lana tailored suit he wore to work. Yeah, right, I'm afraid I look different in this. A bit too stiff, is it? Emilia laughed, then blushed. She was wearing a faded Indian camisole underneath a vintage jeans jacket and cargo pants. He thought she looked lovely in such a casual, simple outfit. No, I didn't mean to. Actually, it's very elegant. It suits you, she said. Sandra's opened arms were a gesture of resignation, slave to a law firm, unfortunately. Right, she said, unsure whether she was meant to laugh. They stared at each other and there was a brief silence, as though they had no idea what should come next. Then Emilia smiled uneasily. Yes? What's the question? Right, it's just, it's a silly question, actually. Go on. What do you mean exactly when you say open your heart? I mean, is it a movement of the chest or a shift in attitude, like an inclination? Emilia's face lit up. It's both. It's a shift, mental and physical. You'll see how everything changes when you become more aware. You really need to open up more, Sandra, to release. I noticed you're pretty locked up. Sandra frowned, but it flattered him that she had noticed something about him. Am I? Yes. Where? She placed the tips of her 3 fingers on his sternum and tapped it lightly, right here. Sandra inhaled deeply and felt his chest expand. As ever, her touch was magical. He was slightly overwhelmed. See, she said, you're already opening up. Wow, that's impressive. We walk around carrying internal steel barriers, and our bodies mirror that. Opening up the heart not only means coming forward with your chest, but more profoundly, letting go of your defenses, being open to possibilities and change. Emilia paused for a second. And more open to love, of course, she added. She still had her fingertips on his sternum, and Sandra felt his heart begin to race. Something inside his rib cage, a surge of air, a tiny creature, spread its wings and flew out of his lungs, following which a vigorous erection blossomed.
Blossomed, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, we have a question. I didn't mention it, but Francesca writes screenplays. lots of screenplays. And the question is, it seems like Francesca's screenplays are all for Italian films written in Italian, but the stories in Animal Spirit were written in English, which I think all your books have been written in English, huh? Has she always turned to English for her fiction?
Yes, I have, because I wrote my first novel in English when I was not living in Italy. And so, that's how I first wrote my, first work of fiction. And then even though I came back to live in Italy, I kept writing in English. I always say this because people ask me about this sort of bilingual thing. I seem to be able to write only in Italian when it comes to film scripts. And I seem to be able to think of novels and literature and fiction only in English. But I think, that I've talked to many people who speak two languages. And for instance, there are things that I can write only in English. Like, for instance, even if I have to write a shopping list, it will be in English. Don't ask me why, it doesn't make any sense. But I mean, if I have to write my grocery list, I write it in English. Who knows?
Otherwise, you need a lot of paper because Italian is just so, sometimes it's just like exhausting.
Yeah. What I'm trying to say is that also, I think your brain makes decisions about which language to use for what.
Right.
You know how many people who speak two languages swear in their original language, no matter, if when you fight with somebody, and you switch to your mother tongue,
right.
Or you dream in a language rather than another. It's fascinating how the brain just assigns different jobs to each language.
Okay, what language do you dream in?
Actually, depends. I think I dream.
What you're dreaming about?
I think I dream. It depends on the context of the dream. I think, who of the people that are populating my dreams. But anyway, yes, I seem to. Whenever I think about an idea that relates to something I may be able to write in the future, I always elaborate it in English.
Well, it's very impressive because speaking another language is one thing. Writing in another language is really impressive.
And honestly, yeah, it is harder for me.
I don't care how well you speak. Writing is a whole other story.
Yeah, but it's still another language.
Yeah. Well, I have another question. Let's see. How did the intensity of the lockdown in Italy affect you? And do you think you will write about it? Really locked down.
Yeah, I wasn't locked down for long. We started earlier than you, and also but it's not a matter of comparison because we've been in the same situation. I was lucky because I spend a lot of time at home. My life is inside the house. I'm a writer. I write at home. So the idea of my house is a place where that is organized for me to be in most of, I have a very organized kitchen, I live at home. Right. So I wasn't, also I'm lucky to be living on a top floor so that I have lots of light. I live on a piazza so that I had a good view of what was happening underneath me. I was on a square, so I could tell what was going on. I must tell you that, although I'm a little ashamed to say it, but I know that this is something that I shared with other people. I actually was kind of a little resistant to go out, not because I was afraid, but because I got so used to this new routine and this peace and the calm. I also live alone. And it was a time of profound reflection. And having that time without the anxiety of having to run here and there, and also of not having to see anybody, I used it I was calm. I was not afraid, and I was very calm, and I sort of missed it when he was over. And again, when I went out for walks, the city was so incredible, so empty and so beautiful. It was just, the beauty of Rome was overwhelming. So I felt like I was in a dream. I felt we were all in a dream. I also felt that we were all doing something together. I mean, the whole world was on lockdown. And at one point I thought, this has never, ever happened in the history of mankind. It will never probably happen again. But we were all in the same conversation, you know, from here to Thailand, Russia, South America. We were all like basically saying, what are we eating today? And which film, what are we watching? What are we reading? You know, but we were in the same conversation. We were listening to the news. And so there was also a sense, instead of feeling the solitude, I felt the connectedness with, you know, with the rest. You know, it was just an amazing sensation.
The universe.
So
do you think you'll write about it?
Hmm?
How can you say? Do you think you'll write about it? That was part of the question.
No, I don't, because it was a very private experience. I wouldn't know what to say. I also think we've all been through it. Do you really need to read what I felt? I mean, frankly, I don't think so. I mean, it's funny, you know, people ran to write stories for movies about the lockdown. I don't want to watch a movie about the lockdown, really. I don't think I do. You know, I don't. It was such a private experience for all of us in various ways that I don't know. Would you want to see a movie or read a book about the lockdown? I'm not sure it's my priority right now.
No, I don't even want to see a movie about the end of the world.
No, I don't. Yeah.
I mean, the next
question. Yeah. Go ahead.
The next question, and both these questions were from Melanie Francis. I should have said that. And this is a tough question, I know.
Oh, Melanie. Hi, Melanie.
Oh, these questions are so hard. What were the books that blew you away this year? Fiction or nonfiction? Of course, you can't remember one, right? It's always so hard to remember.
No. The Archive of Lost Children, the Lost Children's Archive.
Oh, Valeria Lucelli. Okay,
Valeria Lucelli,
yes.
I adored. And The Overstory by Richard Powers, that won the Booker Prize, about the trees.
Yes, I've heard about that. It's supposed to be wonderful. I haven't read that. Okay.
The Friend, Sigrid Nunez, loved it. And then I can't think of any other, but there's probably now a long list of.
I think
books
3 is good. That's impressive.
Yeah, 3 is good.
Okay.
Stop here, right? Rather than 15 titles.
And the next question is, these stories are mostly set in Rome, but your novels have been set in Puglia and Kenya, among others. Mm-hmm. What role does geography play in leading your stories and novels?
Thanks for the question. Well, because I've lived in different places.
I guess, do you start with geography? Do you start with people? Where do you start?
What?
Do you start with geography? Do you start with people? Where do you start?
No, I start with people, but I think geography shapes who we are and how we act. I think the geography is very much, I've lived at the equator, and, you know, where the seasons where there were no difference, and there was like 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark, you know, because at the equator, everything is sort of in half. Yeah. And living at the equator for a long time sort of shaped me in a sense that the rhythm of my life was so, there were no seasons, and there was just always the same amount of light and darkness, and the way that the sun, it's just a feeling that it's very unconscious, but I'm sure that living on a mountain, then I lived in New Mexico for a while, and suddenly this landscape, you know, I was at the high desert. I'm very sensitive to what geography does. The equator where I lived in Kenya was all about water and dampness and rain seasons and this lushness. Then the desert is all about brittle and dryness, like George O'Keeffe picking stones or picking bones, and it's dry. And I thought my brain and my perception of the was so different, of the natural world. I just really think that geography is a dimension that we seem to forget because we think we're always the same. But actually, a person that lives up in the mountain is a very different person that lives on the sea.
Well, look at the characters of people that live in cold and people that live in tropical areas.
Exactly. Exactly. People that live in the very cold and people that live in the. So I think that for me, instinctively, these different landscapes that I've lived in have left some kind of mark in me, and I tend to describe a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When I write, I think I try to really make the landscape come alive because I think it adds a lot to the story.
Oh, absolutely. It becomes almost a character.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I want to remind everyone there's copies of Francesca's collection. Here's the book. If you want to see it, it's a very beautiful cover. Beautiful woman's back. And the stories are great. You can order it. And are there any more questions? If there aren't, is there anything you want to add, Francesca? I'm so jealous that you're in Puglia. Swimming in the sea, I bet.
I want to add that I'm so sorry that because of what happened, COVID, I couldn't make it to the States and we couldn't have done this in person. But on the other hand, strangely enough, I think Zoom allows people that are really far away right now to be, that we can all be together on this, and people that maybe I would have never been able to see are here tonight.
At the store. Right.
Sorry?
They wouldn't have been able to be at the store. How could they come all the way from Europe or Asia?
So it's lovely. And I have to also, thank McNally and John in particular, who read the book on his porch to make it.
That's the best way to discover a book, I find.
Yeah.
Before we say goodbye, I want to do one thing. I want to introduce our animals.
I did see a cat in the background.
I'm going to get my cat. Will you get your cat and then we can sign off? You ready?
My cat's gone.
Oh, well then I'm getting my cat. Hang on.
Yeah, get your cat. She was here actually 5 minutes ago, but she's left. I have a beautiful cat. She's so beautiful. I'm so proud of her.
Did the cat travel from Rome to Puglia?
Yeah, she travels with me all the time.
My cat was very reluctant. He was in his condo, but I do have to tell you that Francesca's cat is, my cat's beautiful, but I think Francesca's cat is even prettier. But anyway, he's gone.
You can all look. I have on my Instagram, you can see my cat. I promise I only post one picture every 6 months. So
as long as it's not the picture on your book.
Oh, I see it, Labrador.
Labrador. We should have animals in tribute to the animal spirit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Louisa, thanks for leading the discussion. And Francesca, thank you so much for letting us host you.
No, it was great.
Thank you, great. And I hope I was
night,
clear.
everybody.
Oh, come here, baby.
Oh, yes.
Oh, competition. Okay. Do we have votes? Come here. What's your cat's name?
Nana.
Oh, this is Francoise.
Oh God, yours is. Anyway, Riders with Cats.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Bye-bye.
Good night.